Welcome to the Exam Room Podcast, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hello, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and today we're going to be talking about something that we really have never, ever talked about on the show before, and that is pH balance and dietary acid load. So we have some really interesting topics here, and you may be wondering, well, what are those things? Well, it's a good thing that you ask because I have with us here today the Director of Clinical Nutrition here at the Physicians Committee, the one, the only, Dr. Hana Kahleova. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you are here because you are one of the smartest guests that we have ever had on this show. And every time that you are here, we're not just doing a regular show. I call this Advanced Science with Dr. Kahleova. So you are not disappointing today because I understand that you and your team have been very busy doing some new research on this very topic. Is that correct?
Absolutely. This is an exciting topic, and it's practical too. Many of you may be drinking alkaline water and may be wondering, what else can I do for my pH balance? And that's exactly the topic of this podcast. People may be wondering, what in the diet makes my body more acidic and what makes it more alkaline? And generally speaking, foods that are rich in protein, especially meat and cheese and eggs and others, increase the production of acids in the body. In contrast to fruits and vegetables that are rich in alkali and will be alkalinizing. And so the capacity of the acid or base production in any food is called the potential renal acid load and can be calculated. And I will show you how to calculate it during the presentation.
Yeah, so let's dive right into the science. Buckle up, everybody, because we're about to nerd out in a big way. So what I'm going to do for those of you who are watching this right now on Facebook and YouTube, I'm going to pull up the presentation. And if you're hearing this on the podcast, I've got links to the presentation right now in the episode notes. So you can go ahead and click on those and play along at home as well. So Dr. Kahleova, on the screen right now is a copy of the study that is hot off of the press.
Absolutely. And you're welcome to check it out. It's free to download. It was published in Clinical Nutrition Aspen. And we looked at the role of dietary acid load in a plant-based diet for weight loss. Just to give you an intro, a dietary acid load has been associated also with increased risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease as an independent factor. So this would be in addition to cholesterol and saturated fat and animal protein and heme iron and other factors. Dietary acid load is another independent risk factor for developing type 2 diabetes and also cardiovascular disease. Now, for athletes, this is an important topic too. If you have a diet that's rich in dietary acid load, that means rich in animal products, which is the bar that's white, in contrast to a diet that's low in dietary acid load, rich in antioxidants in fruits and vegetables, there's a 21% difference in your physical performance. If your diet is rich in vegetables and fruits and low in animal products, there will be a 21% increase in your anaerobic exercise test. And in terms of aerobic capacity, every 10 units decrease in dietary acid load is associated with a 5% increase in physical fitness. And so let's look into some examples. How does it translate into real foods? So when we look at the animal foods, meat and cheese, those are fairly high in dietary acid load. Cheese being higher than meat, and Parmesan being the highest. When we switch over to plant foods, then some foods are still slightly acidic, such as bread, but you can see that the numbers are lower than in animal foods. And sugar, for example, is completely neutral, around zero, more on the alkalinizing side. And now we're getting into negative numbers, which means that these foods are alkalinizing. Here's potatoes and carrots and spinach, and green leafy vegetables are the champion. Those are the most alkalinizing food. If you want to do anything for your pH balance, make sure you consume these green leafy vegetables. And when we have a whole meal, we can calculate how much the dietary acid load is in each meal. So, for example, this ham and cheese sandwich has a positive dietary acid load of more than 40 milliequivalents. In contrast to baked potatoes with spinach that would have a negative dietary acid load, that means that the whole meal would be alkalinizing, minus 23 milliequivalents. So the difference between these two meals is more than 60 milliequivalents, which is a large difference. And a plant-based diet is just amazing from so many reasons. It's high in fiber, high in antioxidants. There's no cholesterol. It contains the healthy plant protein. It's super low in saturated fatty acids. There's there's just non-heme iron, not the heme iron that would be harmful for cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And now the dietary acid load is just an independent factor that contributes to the package why a plant-based diet is so beneficial. It also helps us create a healthy pH balance, which is the underlying condition to keep our body healthy and prevent disease in the long term. And with this background, that's why we decided to look into this topic in our study, where we tested the effects of a low-fat vegan diet versus a usual standard American diet for 16 weeks in 244 overweight adults. And now I'd like to show you the promised formula, how you can calculate the dietary acid load. So the formula contains protein, phosphorus, and so if you have, for example, cheese that was the highest in dietary acid load in the table, cheese would be high in protein and also phosphorus. So that would explain why the value was so high. But you subtract potassium and magnesium and calcium, and those are rich in plant foods. So if you consume plant sources of protein, those will have a lower dietary acid load compared with animal products. Now, in our study, the dietary acid load just plummeted. It just decreased by 24.3 milliequivalents per day on average on the vegan diet. And the participants lost about 14 pounds over the course of 16 weeks. And there was a clear correlation. Every 10 units of a decrease of dietary acid load was also associated with a weight loss of about 1.7 pounds. And when we adjusted, you may be wondering, well, but is it really due to the dietary acid load, or is it maybe that people were eating less energy on a plant-based diet? And that's why we adjusted for energy intake, and the correlation remained pretty much the same. Every 10 units decrease of a dietary acid load were associated with a weight loss of about 1.5 pounds. So with the energy balance in mind, the decrease in dietary acid load can explain about 26% of the weight loss in our study. And so the next time someone asks you, why are you even vegan? You have a new answer, because I care for my pH balance. And with that, I would like to open it for some questions, Chuck.
Why are you vegan? Because I care about my pH. I have heard so many reasons why somebody has gone vegan, but never, never once because they care about their pH until today. So we are breaking new ground here on the program. Very interesting study. Congratulations on its release. And yes, there are some follow up questions here. Number one, I was looking at that list of foods that you were talking about. Specifically, we'll start with the plant based ones. And I'm thinking about the foods that are generally thought of as being acidic, but they're plant-based.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking like citrus, right?
Yeah,
And tomatoes even. Where do they rank in terms of dietary acid load? Did you have the opportunity to look at that?
absolutely. This is a fascinating area. So, for example, if you squeeze lemon into your water, the taste is acidic, but it's an alkalinizing food. So, citrus fruit is all on the alkalinizing side, which may be surprising to many people.
Get out of town. So wow. So even though there's such a thing as citric acid, that citric acid is
Right.
alkalinizing in this case?
Yeah, it's more in terms how it helps our metabolism and how it plays out. And since it's very low in protein. Citrus fruit is very low in protein. Then the other nutrients will play a major role in helping us keep the pH balance. So it may be surprising, but citrus fruit is actually alkalinizing.
Very interesting. I also found it interesting that rye bread was, I mean, more or less
Yeah,
even keel, but just slightly
slightly
in the
acidic.
acidic, right? How does that compare with, say, whole wheat bread, which I think a lot of us turn to?
Yeah, the breads would be on the slightly acidic side, and I just want to say that that's no reason why to avoid bread. Some of the plant foods will be slightly on the acidic side, but you saw how much difference can spinach make, and you don't want your diet to be completely alkaline. You want the mix of some slightly acidic foods and some alkaline foods. Um, and so there's no reason why to avoid bread, even it's on the slightly acidic side. But it's a reason why to exclude the animal products that are super high in dietary acid load.
So whole wheat bread, rye bread, definitely falling into the healthier category. We knew that before the
Yeah.
study, but what about something like white bread? Is the dietary acid load for that different from these other healthier breads?
Not much. It may be, in fact, it may be even a little bit lower because of the lower protein content. So this is just another consideration. Obviously, not the only one that you're making when you choose which foods to eat. There's the fiber content and the antioxidant content that will also play a major role in your decision what to eat. This is just another consideration.
Now, here's something else interesting that I would think was kind of the exact opposite. So, we were just talking about how citrus food is
Mm.
actually alkalinizing, but
Mm.
then to look at the foods that really have a high dietary acid load, at the top of that list
Mm.
was cheese. Cheese is a
Mm.
dairy product. A lot of people look at milk and dairy as being a base, and yet here it is so freaking high. I
Yeah.
don't know how else to say on the dietary acid load. Why is that? Do you think that this food that is generally viewed as that base that can actually neutralize acid in this case is a huge acid producer?
That's a great point, Chuck. And, that's right on point because the dietary acid load, the word acid, uh, is also contained in the amino acids that are in protein, right? We all know that protein is composed of amino acids, and the kidneys will need to somehow deal with these amino acids. And use some buffers to metabolize them and get rid of the extra acids that we're consuming. So it's not surprising that actually protein is the main ingredient in the formula when we're talking about the dietary acid load. It's the amino acids that are also a burden on our kidneys. And that's why cheese, which is a concentrated food and is super rich in protein and also phosphorus, the two main ingredients that increase the dietary acid load. That's why dairy and cheese are so high.
I think it was Parmesan that
Yeah.
ranked highest there. Why was it that that was higher than other cheeses? Does Parmesan have more protein, or is there more salt in there? Like, what's the
Yeah, it's
determination?
even more concentrated. The more concentrated, the higher the dietary acid load in terms of animal foods. So you start with milk, that where the protein content is not as high as in soft cheese. Then you have hard cheese, and Parmesan is like super compacted and super high in super concentrated. There's less and less water as you during this process, and Parmesan is just the highest because it's the most concentrated.
Another thing I was wondering is we hear so much about plant-based diet being helpful with inflammation, and then you hear the word acid, and immediately I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of
Yeah,
inflammatory.
right.
Do the two kind of go hand in hand in this case?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's still an emerging area of research. Right now, we know that the dietary acid load increases the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, but also kidney disease. And I would love to look into the inflammation and the connection with autoimmune diseases as well. And I'm not aware of any literature on this topic so far, but it's an emerging area of research, and I bet there will be some exciting studies coming out.
Oh, I would imagine so. And I know that you look at every last one of those things too. You live for this stuff. I love it. Um, Talked a little bit about salt. We just mentioned that briefly, but one thing that I have not heard too much about is sugar. Now, sugar
Mm.
obviously is in those fruits that we talked about that are alkalinizing.
Mm.
But in your study, did you look at maybe sweets and treats like chocolate candy bars and things like that? How does sugar play a role here in dietary acid load?
Yeah, that's a great question. It doesn't play a major role. Many people are thinking about sugar as, something poisonous or something that has to be completely avoided. In terms of dietary acid load, the evidence is not, that compelling, and it seems like there's no major concern about sugar in terms of dietary acid load. Generally speaking, when people started the vegan diet, their consumption of sweets went down because when you increase the consumption of fruit, you don't need to eat as many sweet treats. So a decrease in sweet treat consumption on a vegan diet was one of the findings, but it didn't seem to play a major role in terms of the dietary acid load.
All right, and just a couple more questions here. Housekeeping, if you will, to wrap things
Yeah.
up. The participants in this study, were they given a strict diet to follow a specific menu?
They were not given a specific menu. They were given just the guidelines to avoid all the animal products, to make the diet vegan. And then to keep it low fat, the fat intake was between 20 and 30 grams of fat per day. And those were the two main rules. So, whether you'd like to have oatmeal for breakfast or, for example, scrambled tofu and rye toast, that was completely up to you.
And this last question is one I think would apply to virtually every study that you do. Is I noticed on your chart that there were a number of outliers in terms of results
Mm.
that people saw during the study. When you see somebody who's really out at the extreme, either on one side or the other of the equation, how confident are you that that particular participant wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily following those guidelines you were just talking about?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, that's why we include everyone in the first analysis. We just include everyone regardless of whether they were sticking to the diet rigorously or not. And in subsequent sub-analyses, we also look at how adhering to the diet was playing a role, or other factors. For example, people change medications during the study, although we encourage them not to change their medications, but sometimes their blood pressure gets too low and they just need to change their medications and reduce their blood pressure medications. So for particular outcomes, we may also need to do a sub-analysis excluding people from the analysis who changed their medications for that particular outcome, for example. But this analysis included everyone in the study, which is the cleanest way how to do it.
All right. Well, here is the deal. There we go. You and I have some more business to do on a episode that will be released very shortly, and so let me just tease that right now by asking whether or not you had the opportunity to look at millet during this study. What is the dietary acid load of millet? And I will tell you why, viewers and listeners, in just a moment. Did you have an opportunity to look at that at all?
Oh, that's a great question. Generally speaking, the cooked grains like millet or quinoa are much lower in their dietary acid load than bread, for example. They're close to zero, slightly on the acidic side, but close to zero.
All right. Now, here is why that random question was asked. It's not really random at all because Dr. Kahleova, when you emailed and said, "Hey, check out this study," I was like, "Great, come on the show, let's talk about it." You immediately fired back. It's like, "Yeah, I'll do that, but only if we can also talk about millet because I have this other great study that I found that you said, it's talking about millet and the role that that can play in helping diabetes." So, really interesting, really in depth analysis there as well on the effect that millet may have on diabetes. So, Dr. Kahleova, you always bring such fascinating research to the show. I tell you that every single time, and I mean it every single time because you are one of the smartest people I know. So, it is a privilege to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Chuck, for having me.
If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well and help to make your world a healthier place.